The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
And welcome to BronxTalk. A busy primary season has just concluded, and we're entering the run-up to citywide election day. Tonight's guest is the chair of the Bronx County Democratic Committee, and we have plenty of political, primary, and election issues to discuss with him. Assemblyman Chairman Carl Hastie is with us tonight. If you'd like to call in with questions or comments, dial in at 718-960-7241, or you can email questions or comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk the chair of the Bronx Democratic County Committee and the Assemblyman in the Bronx's 83rd Assembly District, Carl Hastie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Well, let's just start really with a general question. Evaluate how you think the Bronx County organization did on primary day.
Well, I think we did very well. We supported Bill Thompson, and but the people in the city of New York have spoken, and Bill de Blasio is a nominee, and we're now going to do everything we can to help Bill de Blasio become the next mayor of the city of New York. I think Bill de Blasio ran a good campaign. He connected, I think, with the issues that are probably most important to particularly the people in the Bronx. When he talked about income inequality and wanting to provide more funding for education, those are very attractive issues to Democratic voters. And then if you look everywhere down the line, from public advocate, on down to every member of the city council, and in the special election in '86, so we won. So I think we did very, very well. The incumbent council members did extremely well, and then the open seats, Vanessa Gibson and Andy Cohen, they did extremely well in their races.
Let's talk a little bit about that race for mayor. What did you think, either you or your members, and even the borough president, certainly, you saw in Bill Thompson that you were hoping would resonate with voters? Like, what was special about him that made you say, gee whiz, that would be our candidate?
Well, there's a long-term relationship with Billy Thompson from when he was head of the Board of Education, and also when he was city controller. So there was a long relationship that he had built with the elected officials in the Bronx. And so it really was about, this was a very tough decision. The Bronx had worked well with all of the mayoral candidates. Christine Quinn was very good to the Bronx. John Liu was very good to the Bronx. And remember, even in 2009, we were the first county organization to support de Blasio, for public advocates. So it was really tough, choosing amongst, people that the Bronx respected. But I think it was the relationship and probably Billy's, his style. He's a guy that you probably won't have one person really say a bad word about him. Everybody, as a person, likes Billy Thompson.
I thought that, and I've talked about it with actually some of your colleagues who've been on the show since the election. I thought that de Blasio captured an idea and a concept that the other candidates didn't. And when you have 4 or 5 other candidates...
Well, pretty much all in the same place.
That's right. He defined what he was about better than others.
And I think he also pointed out as well that he would be, for whatever people think about Mayor Bloomberg at this point. I think people are ready to go in a different direction. And I think he was the one who articulated the best that it was time to go in a different direction.
Does it put the Bronx at a negotiating disadvantage with the potential mayor as we go forward? I'll give you an example. I thought it was ironic. I saw de Blasio, and maybe you were there, and other Bronx elected officials were there behind him. And de Blasio has made it clear, for example, that he's completely against the Fresh Direct deal. And there is the borough president smiling, standing behind him, supporting his candidacy. Seems to me there's a bit of a disconnect. Will it be an issue going forward? He says, you know what, they didn't support me. I'm going to give resources elsewhere.
Well, I'll say this to Bill de Blasio's credit. He wants to win this election. He is opened up. He wants a big tent. He's invited all Democrats to be with him. And listen, you're never going to agree on every single issue. I don't care who you are. There were places where we disagree with Billy Thompson on the waste transfer station. So, I mean, there are certain issues where a mayoral candidate is going to disagree even with the organizations and people that support them. So I don't look at any of these issues as a problem. I think Mayor de Blasio will treat the Bronx as well as he's going to treat other places. I'm not worried about that in any regard.
Obviously, the biggest controversy to come out of the primary were
Sure.
the accusations of fraud in the 86th Assembly District. What's your perception of what happened there?
I think whenever you have a close election, I think people try to look for reasons of why certain things happen. Some of the problems that happened in the 86 happened all throughout the city. There were broken machines all throughout the city. I think Joe Loder had commented when he went to go vote, there was a problem that he couldn't turn, any of the levers. But it's not so much about the identification of the problems. It's whether the Board of Elections handled those problems. And if anybody would go and do their research, they will find out that the Board of Elections handled those problems that they were presented. So, listen, I know close elections. This happened last year in the Wrangell Espaillat race. When there's close races, people make statements about certain things.
One of the candidates put on his Facebook page that the DOE still didn't have the actual results to report on the primary to publicize, and yet they certified the election. I think the suggestion is that there's stuff going on behind the scenes, that they really didn't have their act together to count the ballots.
Gary, anybody can go online right now and get the official results from the Board of Elections. So, again, I'm not going to try to qualify people's statements or accusations that they couldn't get information from the Board of Elections.
There is no doubt that your name has been connected with causing the fraud. They said, well, Carl Hastie and Gustavo Rivera are responsible for this. It's been reported and alleged that you were in one or two of the polling places, whether talking to voters or whatever the situation is. So let's just put it out there. Do you have any knowledge? Do you know anything about what had happened? Did you cause any of it? Did you try to urge anybody unfairly or illegally or incorrectly?
Gary, the accusations themselves are so absurd. And as I said to you when you invited me on the show, I said I really didn't want to dignify a lot of time, on the foolishness of their accusations. As the county chair, I visit polling sites all over the city to make sure that, all over the county to make sure that things are okay. I visited polling sites in my assembly district. That wasn't the only polling place outside of my assembly. I think it's incumbent upon me as the Democratic chair to make sure that things are functioning. So for someone to say the fact that I was in a polling site is illegal is a ridiculous statement in its own. I didn't speak to one voter while I was in there. The longest conversation I had with anybody in that polling site was with the police officer who was there, because I was asking her, was everything okay? Because we had heard all of the complaints, the problems of the machines, and she said that everything was fine.
Here's a hypothetical. I don't know if you want to
Sure.
deal with it, but the situation was reversed. Your candidate loses by 82 votes. The opponent's mom was registering voters and talking to people in a polling place, and maybe the head of their campaign was seen in a polling place talking or not talking to voters. What would you think? Would you say, you know what, we ought to really investigate what happened?
Let me deal with that, because like I said, issues happen all the time. When people sign up to become poll workers, and another misnomer, I do not appoint poll workers. That is not the county leader's job, which is another misstatement that they made. And people get assigned in their districts. And once this was brought about, she was moved into another assembly district. So this other statements that she was there and there's not one report from anybody, any employee of the Board of Elections that she was acting inappropriately. Yes, she should not have been assigned at that ED in the Assembly District, but she was moved and spent a good part of the day in another Assembly District.
One final question
Sure.
on this, then we'll move on. One of your colleagues, Louis Sepulveda, was here a week or two ago, said if there were voting problems, then you should be at the forefront calling for an investigation. He said if they're shown to be fraud or gross incompetency, which is really a question about the Department of Elections, he said you should step in and call for a new
Gary,
election.
again, I'm going to say this, and this is the last I'm going to speak on this. The first allegation comes from Hector Ramirez, who was subsequently fired from the Board of Elections for corruption behavior, doing petitioning while he was at work. The other two people who've really been at the head of these accusations, Haley Rivera and Kenny Nunez, these two guys were on your show arguing about who had the support of Nelson Castro. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Enough said on this issue. People want to investigate. Go and have anybody ask for the records from the Board of Elections that will document when one of those machines was broken, the one that they showed a picture, yeah, it was broken. We have no idea who did that. That machine was shut down. People were given paper until that machine was fixed, and then they put it back into circulation. So again, every time there's a close election, we had this in 2009 with Maria Byers. There are always going to be these accusations in close races. So let people, and by the way, the lawsuit that was filed, they went into court today. We are more than confident that it's going to be dismissed in the morning.
Your thoughts on the PAC money that swayed and really slanted the resources that Andy Cohen and Richie Torres had? And isn't this completely antithetical to the notion of elections and democracy, that in local elections where there's not millions of dollars, but you've got literally $175,000 put against one candidate? Is that fair?
I guess that's a better question to ask the Supreme Court, because they're the ones who ruled that you can have these independent expenditures. I believe it's difficult to say that people who want to express an opinion in an election, should not be heard. Can some people say it's unfair? I guess they can say that it's unfair, but those who had the independent expenditures, because then unions did independent expenditures also. So I guess it's difficult to say where it's appropriate or not.
Does it make a candidate for when they get into office more likely to support the interest? This money came from the real estate
that's
industry.
another one of the problems that I have, that the press seems to do, and people running against elected officials say they believe that because somebody supports you or contributes to your campaign, that it's some kind of a bribe or somebody owns you. That is just totally not the case. I've received contributions from people who I've disagreed with. So this idea that if somebody contributes to your campaign that they own you, we really have to get away from that mentality, and you got to start looking at the individual. You want to elect people who are strong enough to say yes or say no based on the merits, not based on contributions.
It would be pretty naive to think that there's not influence out there. Whether you agree in this case that it applies or doesn't apply, but certainly money to campaigns buys influence. I don't think who could deny
I'm not going to ever admit to that. I'm never going to admit that a contribution, buys you.
I'll give you an example. You would, I've got the notes on it. You had received money from the organization about this check cashing store.
Let's get to that.
Sure.
Because again, when
let me just explain to voters
Okay.
or to our viewers. According to the Daily News, New York Check PAC, a check cashing store has made more than $480,000 in contribution to campaigns, of which you received $10,000, and then you came out in favor of legislation that would have opened up the loan.
That's totally not true. Because
Okay,
first
that's
off,
what was in the Daily News.
Exactly. This is what I say about
it.
what happens in the newspaper. Number one, they sponsored the county dinner, which sold it about $400,000 worth of other people. That contribution was made to the county dinner. They did not contribute that money to my personal campaign. But if you look at the newspaper reports, they made it seem like they gave that money to me. They also left out in that Daily News article the other amounts of money that were given to candidates that didn't support the check pack. So what happens, that my problem that I have based on newspaper articles is you guys get to a premise, not you, Gary, but they get to, you have a conclusion, and you're going to write everything to get, to try to steer people to that. Like I said, the amounts of money that were given to people who oppose the bill, that is never put in an article. They only want to write about people who support a bill and how much money they receive.
Why didn't you oppose that bill? It seemed like it wouldn't be fair to Bronxites to have the loan rates go all the way up to 200%.
See, but that's not true. What I'm saying is this, Gary, I have an MBA in finance, and one of the things that you cannot do is APR is not a fair measure of short-term lending. And I'll give you an example. If you say to me, Carl, lend me $100, and I give you the $100, and then tomorrow you go to an ATM machine and take out the $100, and they charge you $2 for it. You know what the APR is on that transaction? 700%. So what we have here now, and what I'm saying is all I was trying to do was get a discussion started. We have to do something. People have short-term financing needs, because right now many of our constituents are going online and getting taken advantage of from some of these payday lenders, because this was not a payday bill, going online and getting taken advantage of by people in other states. We can't stop people from going online and getting loans in other states.
So this was a way of making funding available.
Yes, which would be regulated by the state banking, well, the financial services department. Any of this legislation, everything would be geared and controlled by the financial service. But that didn't come out in the
well,
newspaper.
It came out on Bronx Talk. That's why we're here tonight. Let's say hi to Mark from Pelham Parkway. How are you, Mark?
Kumbaya, my Lord. Oh, I'm sorry.
No singing on the show. No music tonight. What do you got?
Because I've been away. I have just two questions, and one of them is, I'm glad you brought up the point that county can always spend more money unless they get a candidate who can spend more money than them. And you see what happens in the case of Naomi Rivera. She's no longer the assembly, and they supported her.
Okay.
The other question I do have for the chairman is this, and it's a very simple question. And if he's going to dance, then he doesn't have to give an answer.
Just ask the question. And
is he supporting Jeff Klein? Since so many people are calling for Jeff Klein, for somebody to run against Jeff Klein, because they're calling him a Dempublican.
Okay.
Since he sits with the Republican caucus.
Very, very interesting
question.
question.
He's waived the Democratic
Thank you very much.
there. And being the chairman of the Democratic Party in the Bronx, does he support Jeff Klein, or will he support
would you support Jeff Klein? And I guess along with that would be a look into the Senate and what do you make of the three-party system?
Well, let me just say this. The dynamics, I don't agree necessarily with the dynamics that play out in the New York State Senate. But Jeff Klein and I have had a long-standing relationship. Jeff Klein has been very helpful. We actually still cover, before reapportionment, he had a nice sizable chunk of my assembly district, and now he still has a few EDs. Yes, I do support Jeff Klein, because when the organization and the party and things are needed, Jeff Klein is one of the first people, to step up on that. And then on the other vein, in his position, he has been helpful to the Bronx and to other elected officials. Would I prefer a dynamic where Democrats would control? Absolutely, and I've said this, to Jeff Klein. But that's for the Senate, to figure that out and work that out.
And that would not necessarily get in the way of your support for him,
no.
Because you think he's been supportive of the Bronx.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the issues that your colleagues brought up over the past number of weeks is voter apathy and how to energize the electorate. So what discourages people from voting, or why don't we have more enthusiastic elections in the Bronx where, 82 votes in the 86th really was a sample out of 4,000 when it's a district of, 100,000 people?
Gary, it would probably be an easier question for me to answer if that was only happening in the Bronx. But this happens all over the place. I teach political science at Monroe College, and one of the first things I ask when a class starts, like even now, I ask people, when is the last time they voted? I think that people have lost the connection of realizing how important local officials are. Just like people vote for the President of the United States. But it actually is a little more important for you to be concerned about who your local elected official are, because even the president, you're probably in your lifetime, unless you get lucky, are never going to run into the President of the United States. But you'll run into your council person, your assembly person, in the supermarket. But I think there's just a general disconnect between how people think that elected officials can affect.
So why is that, and how do we solve that?
I just think it's a comfortable measure. I think a lot of people feel, no matter who the elected official is, I don't know how much of an impact it is going to have on my everyday life.
Does competition breed, good competition bring people out, fair competition? In other words, if people perceive that PAC money is going to one candidate, and then they say, you know what, what's the point of voting because this candidate has
I don't know if people do that kind of, I think insiders like us do that kind of in-depth analysis, but I just really think that people have to start to see and realize how much one elected official can probably help in their lives. Like I said, I teach political science. I ask students in the class how many of them voted. Not many of them put their hands up. So then I turn around and I say, well, tell me what's the most important issue to you in your life. And they'll start to tell me what's in it. Some of them say, child care. Some say education. Some say health. And then I try to explain to them as a state legislator how I'm able to effectuate those things in their life. And I just think we have to do that. I think we have to go back to teaching civics in school, which is something that we really, don't have.
What do you make of the, and this is really all part of this voter apathy thing, because my sense is that this is what people react to. What do you make of the fraudulent signatures that were handed in by Maria del Carmen Arroyo's campaign? Rather than have Stanley Schlein in court trying to defend her, shouldn't there be a standard that says, you know what, if you can't manage your campaign properly so that everybody gets embarrassed, then maybe we ought not to support you?
Well, you remember there's some underlying circumstances there.
Which we debated on this show.
Right, so what I'm saying is she
she
contracted people to do her petition operation, which is something that a lot of candidates do now, particularly with matching funds. There's more money available, you do that. So I don't know if you can necessarily blame her for the actions of, well, you should not blame her for the actions of people who she contracted to do a job
She's not
for.
responsible for those people?
What do you mean?
In other words, if she contracted them, it's on her behalf. It's almost like one of these ball players who says, my agent is negotiating for me, and then I don't like what my agent negotiated.
But one of the things that you really always are supposed to do, and as under legal advice, is as a candidate, you really should kind of stay as far away from your petitions, as possible. And then this went to court. So if Maria del Carmen Arroyo didn't have enough valid signatures, the courts wouldn't have done her any favors. Mm-hmm. They said she had more than enough valid signatures to be on the ballot, and that's what happened. So yes, there was some fraudulent activity, but I don't blame Maria for that. She honestly hired people to do a job for her. They failed in that, and they did whatever it is that they did, and they may now have to answer for that.
I suppose one of the issues that's out there is reputation of elected officials. And in the Bronx, we've had Larry Seabrook and Efrain Gonzalez, Pedro Espada. They're incarcerated as we speak, potentially. And, of course, we preclude nothing about what might happen to Eric Stevenson. Are the standards too low to get endorsements? Those candidates, at one point or another, the county organization supported them.
Well, like I said, when we decide to support a candidate, we do an extensive interview, background check, and things like that. So, but once things happen, I can't, really answer for that. When Eric Stevenson ran, yes, we did an extensive, background check on him, but I can't control people's actions once they become elected. Do
you support the Governor's Moreland Commission and his efforts to rid the state of corruption, including wanted to get to the bottom of legislators' personal finances?
We did an ethics reform bill at the governor's request in 2011, which actually has had us to have more disclosure than we, had before. And, that ethics reform bill was supposed to be the savior, of all legislation to, to satisfy the public. And, for me, I do think that's enough. I'm not one of these people, the only outside income I get is teaching at Monroe College. But I am troubled somewhat by every time one legislator gets in trouble. That doesn't mean every legislator is. Mm-hmm. And I even look at this, the fact that Nelson Castro was wearing a wire for 4 years in the assembly, and it was Eric Stevenson is what happened. Mm-hmm. So I think that probably should be more of a testament to how honest some people are in the legislature.
I'm so tempted to ask you, are you nervous about something?
Not at all. Not at all.
I've asked many of your colleagues on and off the air that question.
You can ask me on, you can ask me off. Not at all.
I want to give you almost since you teach political science, let's talk political science. What if there was a different view of the Bronx County organization? And I've had this discussion with many of your colleagues. What if the county organization didn't endorse anybody, but just insisted on balanced and fair elections and just said, we will support, maybe not with dollars, but we will support any candidate that comes to us and that is valid and has a well-run campaign, so that we don't have this kind of rancor that we have like a political elephant in the room, and that all the candidates, all we do is sponsor really good elections with really good grassroots people, would we energize the electorate and would we have a higher quality of elected officials in the long run?
Well, you asked me about 19 different things and all that.
Good. Well, let's go. Well,
number one, I think there's benefits of an organization. There's benefits of an organization working together. And when I say this is, when you look at the elected officials, when you look at the Bronx Assembly delegation or the City Council delegation, there is a working cohesiveness that you guys don't ever get to see. Gary, one of the complaints that I always make is, you know, whenever we're doing something positive in our districts, it is like twisting arms to try to get, you know, the media or reporters to come when we're doing something, you know, good. But let one of us get in trouble, you guys don't even have to be called before you want to show up. So I'm not going to say that we should not have an organization that gives resources to people, that tries to help out elected officials. I think organizations working together and candidates working together builds unity. And this is the same thing, like even in this year's council election. These guys now are going to have to, you know, get together and vote for a new city council speaker. But the organization and the members working together, they will do and vote on, you know, on what's best. So I do believe in the organizational structure.
Do you have a selected candidate or a method for selecting a candidate to replace Vanessa Gibson in the State Assembly? What's your vision of what's coming up?
My vision is, see, the other thing people fail to realize, there are rules in place in the state party. If the governor so chooses to call a special election in that seat, then it is up to the duly elected county committee members in that district to select.
I would think he will, wouldn't he?
I don't know. He didn't call one in the '86. I have no idea. I have not spoken to the governor on this on this issue.
If you did, what would you tell him? What would you like to see?
Well, I think one of the challenges the governor has to wrestle with, you know, he said he likes to see primaries, but there are a number of assembly members and senators, and if Daniel Squadron happens to win tomorrow, that'll be another state senator. You have Eric Adams. You may now have, and there are a couple of upstate members who are moving on to other jobs. You may have, you know, 10 or more vacancies in the New York State legislature, and if he doesn't call specials, you're going to have 10 vacancies. Right. And there may be, I think there's a, I just want to qualify really quick.
We're going to run. Go ahead.
Okay. But like there may be a community. I believe that Inez Barron and Eric Adams actually have some small pieces together, so you can actually have people not being represented when the legislature is seated in January.
Assemblyman Carl Hasty, Chairman of the Bronx County Democratic Committee, thank you for joining us.
Anytime.
Appreciate it, and we do appreciate you coming on. I think it speaks well for you and for the organization that you're here. Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com or make a comment on our Facebook page. We'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Our archives available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar, and we invite you, of course, to be a fan of the program on Facebook. Next week, it's education. We'll talk with a couple of Bronx teachers about an organization of thousands of teachers, which is called BAT, the Badass Teachers. Yes, you heard it right, Badass Teachers. But the issues are serious, what's going on in our classrooms and how to improve them. And here's the first public announcement of it, but on Monday night, October 14th, we'll be celebrating the 19th anniversary of Bronx Talk, and we're thrilled that the Kingsbridge National Ice Center will be joining us, including their new CEO, which is New York sports icon and New York Ranger great, Mark Messier. Yes, Mess will be here, joining us to talk about the prospects for the Kingsbridge National Ice Center at the Armory. Our 19th anniversary, October 14th, with Mark Messier as one of our guests. So make sure you're with us. And we're here, of course, every Monday night at 9 o'clock. Thanks to Jane, thanks to Dina, thanks to Shirley, thanks to you, thanks to him. And we'll see you. Good night.